There is a nice little cross flow in my apartment. Rain has temporarily stopped and it's nice, but let's hope it doesn't spoil the sound too much as I record this podcast. Nonetheless, we are talking about economic principles for integrating adaptation into fiscal policies. So we'll continue with this. And the biggest economic principle, of course, is oops, I'm not in the display mode here, is the cost-benefit analysis. But what are the challenges of cost-benefit analysis? Lack of data is a challenge for everything in the climate business, especially to look at impacts on health, agriculture, biodiversity, and so on, just in terms of separating natural variability and climate change, adding, worsening some of these things. So lack of data, uncertainty in estimating the benefit of adaptation, and lack of capacity may limit the practical implementation of cost-benefit analysis. So capacity building to improve public financial management, PFM, and specifically cost-benefit analysis and project implementation could play an important role in addressing the adaptation challenge. So it's very important. If adaptation is to be prioritized, then this becomes a big challenge. Estimating net benefits for adaptation programs that have a very long lifetime can be complex. So if you're investing today's dollars or rupees for future benefits for future generations, especially if it's that long, then there is this business of discounting the value of the present rupee into the future, and that's a very big uncertainty. If you assume a 3% versus 5 versus 10, the value of your investment can dip very quickly, so estimating net benefits for adaptation can be tricky. Coastal protection, climate resilient infrastructure, and water distribution systems are examples of investment in adaptation with large upfront costs and benefits that accrue slowly over time. Predicting the impact of these projects and monetizing benefits far into the future is difficult and subject to deep uncertainty. Okay? Despite limitations, cost-benefit analysis can play an important role in helping decision makers to consistently collect, aggregate, and compare information on adaptation projects, which should help cost-benefit analysis, but obviously it's a challenge. So one of the very first applications of CBA was by this paper in 1954 to select optimal flood risk management in the Netherlands, a program subject to systemic risks. So as of now, Netherlands is still struggling with adaptation to climate change and increasing sea levels and flood risks because it's so low to sea level. Basically within a meter or so, then this is one of their major concerns, and it's a rich country, so it can afford to be progressive about taking risks into account in protecting itself against or adapting itself for resilience, and it has invested enough in meteorological forecasts, early warning systems as well, and then it's very good at telling people what the government has adapted to and insured them against, and what the residual risks are that they are responsible for themselves, and so on. So this is a very advanced country, well off, so it has done a good job. Now moving to distribution and equity, another key economic principle. The net present value of a program measures the aggregate net benefit in society, but distributional impacts can be critical and should be estimated by the analysts and assessed by the government. So let's read this to understand the distributional impact concept. In standard CBA applications, gains and losses are summarized across society and across present and future generations, treating everyone equally. So how the distribution of the costs and benefits of investments, or the net present value of a program affects people based on their socioeconomic status is not always accounted for. The underlying rationale for recommending investment when NPV is greater than 0 is that the program may not make everyone better off, but winners can potentially compensate the losers. This is called the Kaldor-Hicks compensation principle. Governments can redistribute the aggregate gains of a project to implement their preferred distributional outcome using direct compensations or, more broadly, fiscal policy. So you can build in these distributional compensations as a normative idea into the fiscal policy. This includes choosing how to collect revenues to offset the cost of adaptation. The distribution of benefits and costs should reflect society's preferences and is a normative judgment left to governments. Okay, so Netherlands is very progressive in that sense, but then there is not much of a socio-economic divide in that country. Small, relatively homogeneous. When NPV is negative, the standard recommendation in CBA is not to invest in adaptation, but governments can still compensate those negatively affected. So in this case, NPV is negative, but the government takes care of it by compensating. Governments could decide to use adaptation policies for redistribution motives within and between countries. Governments would benefit from weighting the costs and benefits of redistributive adaptation programs against those of other available redistribution instruments. If a combination of efficient adaptation policies with dedicated redistributive programs can have a larger aggregate net benefit for the entire population and for the most vulnerable, it should be preferred. So this is again a normative statement. Should you really worry about the most vulnerable or just abandon them? This is very much a normative issue. Finally, compensation might be more efficient than investments to achieve society's equity preferences. So investments may mean lifting the the poor and the vulnerable by long-term investments in education, infrastructure, housing, employment, retraining, and maybe economics activities to take care of these things, which may be much more complicated and slow than simply compensation as a way to help the most vulnerable if resources are available. Right? So this can take the form of relocation, subsidies, or other forms of supports with less stringent conditionality when you are dealing with devastating disasters in areas where people are simply not able to cope. In the latter case, moral hazard issues should be considered, as post-disaster relief might still be expected in addition to ex-ante compensation for those who decided to stay in the risky area. So can you always force people to move? Not necessarily, because they may be tied to the place and livelihood in that place, like fisheries or farming or living in forests for generations, and you cannot uproot them, move them. So some compensation mechanism and others, moral hazard issues may be there in letting them stay there, or telling them that this is simply not it's simply not possible to protect them against these risks anymore. Okay, so we'll come back and read these other points about ensuring consistency across multiple programs under distribution and equity, just to keep this podcast not getting too long. It's only 8 minutes, so maybe I should read a bit more. Sorry for jumping in and out. Okay, so to ensure consistency across multiple programs, including all development investments, governments can standardize, let me get the pointer up, how they assess trade-offs across different groups in society and across different goals. There are several ways to carry out these analyses. So you have a country like India with a diverse population with all kinds of different groups based on, you can go purely by economic wherewithal, or you can also look at other more subtle issues of their access to power or information or water or electricity electricity. Sorry, I'm getting a call here, so let me stop this for a sec. Sorry, it was a spam call that I shouldn't have taken, but it's hard to know. Okay, so trade-offs across different groups in society and across different goals. There are several ways to carry out this analysis. Multi-goal analysis, just to read off, the government establishes some important goals besides economic efficiency, so it's not always economic feasibility and efficiency, maximum GDP growth, etc. So these could include reducing the number of people living in poverty and preservation of cultural heritage. If the impacts of the program on these goals could be monetized, for example by estimating the willingness to pay WTP of society to attain them through tax and other instruments, they should be added in the net present value calculation. If they cannot be monetized, governments would benefit from assessing trade-offs transparently and consistently. This exercise should be conducted considering a wide array of alternative development programs that can attain the same goals, so the governments can select the most efficient combination of programs. For example, means-tested cash transfers can be compared to adaptation programs in attaining the goal of reducing poverty. So, complicated issues. Distributionally weighted cost-benefit analysis is possible. Social welfare function, so a more systematic approach to assess alternative goals and distributional issues would rely on a social welfare function that reflects preferences across different goals on inequality aversion. So you avoid inequalities by using this social welfare function. The combination of programs that maximizes the social welfare function with the given budget constraints should be selected. So there's some optimization involved. Although appealing and conceptually useful, this approach cannot be easily implemented because it's hard or maybe impossible to estimate such a function. So you can easily intuitively think of a social welfare function, but what are the indices that go into actually defining this function? How do you monitor, evaluate, and assess progress is not always easy. If there is a strong preference for a specific set of results, cost effectiveness analysis can replace cost-benefit analysis. Cost-effectiveness analysis does not estimate the benefits of a project because it is assumed that the necessity of the intervention has already been established using other criteria. So you don't worry about cost-benefit analysis. You think this has to be done, then you just look at cost effectiveness of investing in that. The objective of cost effectiveness analysis is to find the least expensive solution to attain the desired set of goals. So it's slightly different. We'll come back and read this box on adaptation strategies for countries vulnerable to droughts as an example of economic principles that can be used to serve integrating adaptation into fiscal policies. Okay, so we'll have a few more podcasts to wrap up this staff note 1, then we'll have staff note 2 and 3, so that we have adaptation principles from the World Bank report and these from IMF staff notes to add the adaptation ideas together, because without economic analysis nothing happens, without economic feasibility nothing happens. So no matter how much we want to talk about normative choices, economics eventually plays a role in terms of where the society will invest, even if it has all the resources. So we'll continue with this discussion in the next podcast. Okay.